to submit a written supplementary question or to join the meeting to ask their supplementary question. The supplementary question must be a question and not a statement, and arise directly out of the original question or the reply, and must take no longer than 1 minute to ask. I will now ask the clerk to confirm if a supplementary question is to be asked. First of all, for Mr. Parkinson.
No, Chair.
No question, thank you. And for Ms. Reid. Ms. Reid, you're present, but I think the practice is for us to read your supplemental question. Thank you.
Okay, so a supplementary question from Ms. Reid. The Statement of Accounts 2022-23 includes page 15. The Council's looked after children population is higher than our statistical neighbours and continues to require significant resources to support. I think is considerably higher would be a truer statement. Sufficiency strategy, i.e. enough foster placements, etc., is on the corporate risk register the 30th of January 2023 Audit and Governance meeting. Of course, if the number of children in care is reduced, sufficiency is mitigated. Actions to reduce the number of children in care include by investing in early help, reunification of children with families, and family group conferences, and they accord with the law and good practice. Early help is under-resourced, Cabinet meeting 22nd of June 2023, yet the average cost of one child in care fostering agency for a year is over £46,000. Should the further actions required on the corporate risk register be updated to include early help, etc.
Thank you, Ms. Reid, for your question. We're very much aware of your concerns in this area in the council. As we move forward looking at the risk register, we will take your comments into account. And meanwhile, I will make sure the Director of Children's Services is aware of your concerns. Thank you. Moving on then to questions from councillors. We have a question from Councillor Harvey. The response has been published. Are we aware of a supplemental question from Councillor Harvey?
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. So now we get on to the meeting item 7, progress report on internal audit activity. So this is internal audit. We have the external auditors with us as well today. The external auditors are the Southwest Audit Partnership. I think I will. Do I ask Rachel to introduce this item? Okay, so we go to Southwest Audit Partnership, please.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, that's loud and clear. Thank you.
Great. Sorry I can't be there in person today. Normally I would attend, but I've got another audit committee meeting later on this morning, so many apologies for that. I think before I dive into the report, I think I should probably tell you a little bit about SWAP. We're your internal audit providers, and my team, and a little bit about myself as well. I'm your head of internal audit. I've got 30 years experience in the public sector. I'm also a head of audit for another local authority in Wales, but I've been in the role with Herefordshire Council for a year now. The team that I operate consists of 10 people, plus we then drive into specific teams that look at IT audit, into fraud, and also data. Data is a big part of where we are as an internal audit team at the moment. And in terms of SWAP, the organisation, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We serve 22 public sector partners, and they range geographically from Dorset in the south to East Riding of Yorkshire in the north. But Herefordshire Council is an owner. You are an owner of SWAP Internal Audit as a partner. So that's a little bit about SWAP and who we are. If there's no questions, I'll continue. Before I head into the reports, and there's two today I'm going to just discuss or address with you, I'll just talk about the normal cycle you should expect as part of the internal audit reporting process to committee. Now, that normal cycle would be about the internal audit plans, and the plan is one of the reports you'll get today. And that's a half-yearly report that you'll get So that will make sure that the plans you get are agile and flexible and focused on the changing risks and changing corporate priorities. And I'm sure there will be changes throughout the year. Then on top of that, you'll get a quarterly progress report. And that's quarterly, as I've mentioned, and that will talk about the activity, the audits that we do, about the concerns that I have as your head of internal audit, and it will also give you an indicative opinion about where I feel the organisation is in terms of the internal control environment. So I'll do that every quarter. And then at the end of each year, I present an annual report to you, which will again looks at the overall summary of the work we've done for the year, and will give that opinion on the internal control and identify any high risk areas. So that's the process you should expect from me as head of internal audit over the next 12 months. Now, unless there are any questions, I'll move on to the specific report, and this is item 7. The cover report is item 7, and that's on page 19. And I think I should probably talk about the purpose of the report to start off with. And the purpose of the report today is to update you on the progress of our work up until the end of Q4 for last year, to make you aware of any significant concerns that have come up as part of that work, and to give you some assurance that internal audit is carrying out its role effectively. So if I can draw members to Appendix A in particular, and that's on page 23 of the agenda pack. And that's a report on internal audit activity. And there's a summary on page 24, and I'll just run through the headlines of that for you. It talks about 46 assignments that have been completed in last year. And because of that work, we are therefore on track to have a suitable body of work that will enable me to give you an annual audit opinion. At the moment, that annual audit opinion is indicative of reasonable, which would be generally sound systems, but there are some issues that would require improvement. During that, the work to date, we've identified 100 agreed actions that we've agreed with the client. The overall coverage of the strategic risks and corporate objectives I assess as adequate at the moment. But I think that the planning process that we've just gone through reinforces that link, in particular to the corporate objectives. We also undertake advisory work, and we're undertaking some special investigation work at the moment, which I will report to the committee as and when it's suitable, depending on where we are with that investigation. In terms of, are there any issues to keep you awake at night? There are no high corporate risks that I should bring to your attention, but there are concerns around the registration services, housing solutions, and the leavers process. But given the timing of this committee, I believe that it's more appropriate that I should bring those services and those reports in full to the next meeting of the committee, where officers can be invited along to attend and give you an update in terms of the mitigation of those control risks and control weaknesses. So in terms of a final headline, the final headline I'd like to talk about is the implementation of our new audit management system. So in SWAP Internal Audit, we've migrated to a new system called Audit Board, and that will be, we've undertaken that in Q1, but from Q2, the council, the officers, you as audit committee members will be able to see real-time dashboards that will give you indications about where we are in terms of performance and also in terms of the outcomes of the reports. So those are the headlines. In terms of the detail, the internal audit work programme is included in Annex 2, which is a list of jobs by status and opinions and agreed actions. That's the end of my report, Chair. If members have any questions, I'll gladly try and answer them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. So any questions from the committee? No, so just for clarity, Ian, so you produced all these reports. and you make your own professional judgment as to whether any should come to this committee. And to an extent, we need to trust your professionalism in that respect. And you've identified two particular issues which will come to the next committee with some detail: registration services and the various issues on housing. Is that a fair summary?
That is a fair summary, Chair. And I guess in terms of the role of committee, when I do come to the next meeting with the services, it's important that committee have assurance that the appropriate risks have been mitigated, and you can see some evidence of that. So yes, absolutely. Okay,
so it's not just reporting the risk but mitigation. That's helpful. So when I look at the list in Annex 2, on the right hand side, there's numbers 1, 2, and 3, and the issues which we might have if you have things in item 1 where there are significant fundamental issues. That's a concern. And also, I've noted there are a couple of special investigations here in this list, and you've done your work and you're satisfied that we needn't be concerned about any of those special investigations either. Otherwise, you'd be alerting us to them, presumably.
Yes, we have undertaken one particular special investigation that's been broken up into 3 phases, and that's been ongoing for some time now. We are liaising with the authority and with the police. So I think the status of those investigations will stay as confidential until it comes to the end of formal investigation. But as soon as that formal investigation is over, I will make committee aware of certainly the issues and risks and controls that allowed those issues to occur.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, Mark. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, Councillor Woodall from Leominster South. You mentioned that there was going to be a real-time dashboard facility provided. Will there be some training, and when can we expect that?
Yes, absolutely, Councillor. There will be some formal training that I will deliver to you. It will be either within July or, depending on the break that the committee will have, or it'll be at the start of September, and that will indicate how you get access to the dashboard, how you can see the outcomes of the reports, and how you can see where we are in terms of performance and delivery. So those should be real time. So to some degree, it limits the need to report to you at these meetings because you can see it at any point in time. But yes, absolutely, I will deliver you some training.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So then going to the recommendations on page 19. First recommendation is the committee review the areas of activity and concern and be satisfied that necessary improvements are outlined and delivered. And secondly, the committee note the report and consider the assurances provided and the recommendations which the report makes. And we commented on content as necessary. So that recommendation, all in favour of accepting that recommendation? Show of hands if possible, please. Thank you very much. Okay, so we move now to item 8. Ian, I think this is for you again. The same pattern, if we may, if you would provide us with just a brief summary going through the paper, and then we'll have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I present this report to you today looking for your approval, and it is the internal audit plan of work and then the future pipeline. So that's the work that's either in progress because obviously we're already in the year. It's the work that we have planned, and we've discussed those with clients, and it's the pipeline, which is the work that then progress as we complete work. It's the next jobs off the rank to make sure that we have a continuous flow of work available to complete. So it's approving the plan, and it's also approving the audit charter. And the audit charter it talks about the relationships between internal audit and the council. So that report's on page 43 of your agenda pack. Draw members' attentions to page 45 of my report, and talk about, I think it's important I talk about my approach to planning, because you need to understand how I've come up with this list of jobs, and what the reasoning is behind that. So if I just briefly talk about the planning process, I think, and these will be, what we have is a number of factors that would influence my decision or my decisions. The main ones would be around the council's corporate objectives, and I appreciate that those may change in terms of a new political administration. But so we've looked at the corporate objectives. I've assessed the strategic and the service risks, just to have a look at those and see how we can support the delivery of those or the mitigation of those in internal audit work as well. In what we carry out our own sector-wide risk assessment as well. So we look at all of our partners, all 22 partners, but also what's happening nationally in our professional bodies and in the general audit environment, and we carry out a risk assessment that's there as well. So that feeds into this process. I consider your core processes, and that's because those core processes promote a healthy organisation. So it's important that we look at those core processes as well. I look at the work of your other assurance providers, so I've taken that into account. I liaise with the council officers, so I meet with the council officers, and also we sent out questionnaires. I also met with the chair of the audit committee last year as well to get input and feedback about what they think the key risks are and items that go into the audit plan. I consider the work of the counter fraud team and the fraud risk assessment that's undertaken to make sure that internal audit work is aligned to those fraud risks, so that I can look at the controls and I can report back to you if I think there are any opportunities or areas where there could be material fraud. And then finally, I use my knowledge and experience of 30 years in the industry to have a look at where we are as an organisation and just pick up on areas I think that should also fit in there as well. So that's the process. Page 46 talks about the risk assessment. So that's a summary of the risk assessment that I've undertaken. And it's broken down into a number of areas. It looks at the local areas that are Herefordshire based, the regional, which is the Midlands area, the national area, and then some of those core services. So that's just a summary of some of the things that are coming out of the larger risk assessment. Page 47 reflects on coverage and where some other areas of coverage are. And again, that recognises your corporate objectives under environmental, economy and community, but it also recognises those key areas of fundamental coverage as well. And as you'll see, they are mostly good. On page 48, it just identifies the areas of risk that we won't cover. So we're not going to do any work at this moment, or not planning to do any work on those areas. But it also outlines the resources that we're applying to this work as well, which is 900 days. And then finally, I'll point to
save you continuing to talk. It's interesting on page 48 about ash dieback. That no action is taken on that. That doesn't necessarily say it is a risk and it is a problem. It's just you haven't done any work on it. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct, Chair. I think that there are some risks that don't align with internal audit work, and this is one of those. It's more difficult to align the work of internal audit to that risk, and so therefore, management already have systems, processes, plans in place to deal with that. And therefore, I feel there's significant assurance around that. And internal audit can't realistically add any value to that. So yes, your assumption is correct.
So also on the previous report, within the corporate risk register, number 67, it is raised as an issue. I wonder whether Andrew Lovegrave wanted to comment on this particular issue and what assurance we might have on this committee about this risk.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of ash dieback, we have a public realm contractor at Alpha Beatty who manage our public estate, and the full council in February, an amount was allocated in the capital programme for dealing with ash dieback to the public estate. So the contractor is dealing with those risks and handling those risks on our behalf. I think it may be helpful to come back to this committee just to explain the links between the council and our contractor and how they're managing those, because they're the experts on looking after the public realm, and there is already an ongoing process for removing affected trees that are at potential risk of falling onto the highway or other areas of risk. But it's not a finance type thing or a normal part of the council duty, but it's one of the things that we've contracted to our public realm contractor to handle on our behalf.
Yes, all the observations on that.
Yes. Well, I understand we have in the current budget allocated resources to ash dieback, and that's Balfour Beatty are acting as our agents in carrying out that plan. Seems quite considerable resources put forward in the budget. I think that, I mean, it is a large risk to the council. So my understanding is that we are dealing with this risk. Is that correct?
Through you, yeah. So there is a plan that they are dealing with it on our behalf. It is a considerable resource, but we're blessed with very large counties with lots of lovely trees. So there is a large volume of these trees to be dealt with and assessed.
Yeah, we have 500,000, I gather.
So I think, Mr. Lovegrove, if you're offering to come back with a report to future committee,
that's the offer, yes, Joe. If you'd like us to arrange
that would be helpful. Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, going on then.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just coming towards the end of the report now, and I think in terms of the audit plan, the most important part is in Appendix 1, which is on page 50, and those are the actual jobs that we intend to do for the year. And they're broken down into planned and those that are waiting to go live and those that are in a pipeline. Appendix 1 is it shows the name of the assignment, the sponsor, and the status, and then the middle sections of the plan show the rationale for selection. So it's really important for us that we understand why we're doing this and the links to those and when we're doing audit work, we can then go back and understand our work, gives you assurance that those either risks or objectives are being delivered. And then there's some commentary at the end about the work that we do. So that's pages 48 to 52. On 53, there was
I think we'll stop. We'll stop there for a moment. I think the charges are set separately. It's quite difficult with a new committee to be looking whether this programme is appropriate. But I think you said to us that after a few months, if we want to add things, we can. There's that element of flexibility. And I note the sort of broad range of work which you're doing. For instance, staff car parking, business passes, follow up, which may not be specifically finance related necessarily, but you do have a broad approach to these things. We looked at our ash dieback. The other item in the previous report, which had a couple of reds, was the waste collection vehicles. And I don't know whether, is that within your programme for this coming year? I'm sure, given my previous position, Mr. Ludgrove will have something to say about this. But it's highlighted as with two reds in your previous report, but is it covered in some way in this report, in this programme for next year?
At the moment there is no intention to specifically look at waste collection vehicles, and I think that was more around driver availability. However, there are pieces of work that are going to look at recruitment, selection, workforce planning. So there are pieces of work that are on the periphery of that, but not specifically that issue. My understanding is that risk is probably reducing. So it's going in the opposite direction. Clearly, as a head of internal audit, I'm more concerned about the things that are coming over the horizon. But
I think this one is coming over the horizon with the inability to supply lorries which are eco-friendly. Andrew, could you give us a little bit of information about this?
Certainly, Chair. So the position is that the council is currently in a procurement process to appoint a new contractor to handle the waste collection. services aligned to the new waste strategy that the council has agreed. And part of that arrangement is the making sure that the contractor has access to the right vehicles to do the job, and the issues, as the Chairman just said, about the environmental impact of those vehicles. So the risk was identified. There was a national supply chain issue about ordering these vehicles and getting them delivered on time, which is why we run the procurement process now to enable the time. But it is a risk that we're managing in terms of the procurement process, and it will be something once we've appointed the appropriate contractor, we'll follow up and make sure they have an appropriate supply chain to get these vehicles delivered. And I understand there are contingencies to make sure that the contractor, when they start the new contract, has the vehicle, and maybe a time lag to get new vehicles. It's been actively managed by us.
So Ian, with that additional information, do you want to add anything to the audit plan, do you think?
I think waste management is on the audit plan, Chair, and so I'm more than happy to make sure that we consider that aspect and the linkage to that risk in that piece of work.
Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Andrews.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry to these seem stupid questions, but I look at these 3 pages of planned work, and I just wonder if there's any sense of prioritising them, because to my simple mind, some of them seem a great deal more important than others.
In terms of priority, Councillor, it is broken down into the work.
Yes, we've heard that one.
In terms of the work that we're doing now, those things that are going live, but there is no actual priority around those. They've just been judged in my professional capacity as items that either need doing because they're linking to corporate risks. There is other jobs that I will introduce that have a lesser priority throughout the year and changing priorities, but in terms of this plan, there is no specific priority.
I see. Thank you. It just seems to me that some sort of prioritisation of this rather long list might be appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. My next question goes to page 283 of the pack. This might be a theme of the next couple of years. Kind of contract management and the PMO which we have, we need to make sure it's working effectively. And on page 283, it's from the auditors, and it says about halfway down, the review raised 11 recommendations, of which 1 was priority 1, findings are fundamental and require immediate action, and 8 priority 2. It is our understanding that these recommendations remain unresolved and an update has not been provided to the Audit and Governance Committee. Ian, do you have that paper in front of you?
I am just scrolling to it now, Chair. I think this possibly refers to some work that we did previously around the public realm contracts and project management. And I can assure committees that at the moment that's going through a follow-up process. It's been ongoing for a month or so now, and I will report the outcomes of that. So I will report back to members on whether those actions identified in those internal audit reports have been implemented. The priority 1 and the priority 2s.
Okay, if you would, thank you. I think it might be particularly helpful as we've got the auditors here to let them know there has been some progress on that. Thank you. Right, any other questions from members of the committee? No, thank you very much. So then the next item, as you say, is the charter, and I think it's quite instructive for the committee as a new committee. Towards the bottom of page 55, it says the Audit Governance Committee is responsible for approving the scope of the internal audit work, receiving communications from SWAP, reviewing the independence, objectivity, performance, professionalism and effectiveness of the internal audit function, and obtain reassurance of the SWAP director as to whether there are any limitations. I hesitate at such an early time to be asking how we can measure your performance and professionalism. We might leave that to a later time. But also, the third paragraph refers to the budget for the provision is determined by the council in conjunction with the SWAP members meeting. I wasn't quite sure who the members are, but that's all the joint owners, including ourselves at SWAP. So the budget is agreed at the beginning of the year and can't be changed without the members of that committee. So I might have stolen some of your thunder, Ian. I don't know. You were going to comment on the charter. Thank you.
I think you summarised it well, Chair, to be honest. I think, the charter is there. It's a requirement of the professional standards that we have one and that it is approved annually. It does define the relationship between internal audit and the council. I think that, there are items in terms of performance and quality and reporting lines that are very important in there that we understand and we measure and we monitor. You mentioned quality. In terms of quality, we have a number of quality review processes going in place internally, but also as part of our professional standards, we're required to have an external review that's undertaken at least every 5 years. In SWAP, we do that every 3 years. And from that, there is an improvement program that comes out. But the SWAP, in the last review that was undertaken in 21, we were found to be compliant with the standards. So, but I think the questions around performance, I welcome. I think those are good questions. So, in terms of the charter, I think one of the key areas is that it does promote independence and objectivity, and that's really important as an audit committee, that you have objectivity, and as an internal audit service we have objectivity and independence. And certainly I have no reason to believe or no issues around that or compromises to that at this stage. So I'm pleased to report that. So if I can just ask members to approve both the plan and the internal audit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Aubrey, can I turn to you as a Chartered Accountant, whether you've got any comments on the charter particularly?
Well, the internal audit has fleshed out, I think, there are priorities as far as they're concerned regarding fraud and that the governance is followed, but the general plan layout seems to be a considerable amount of work and should keep us on the right track.
Yeah. Any other questions from anybody? Comments? No. Please, thank you very much. So the recommendation is that we approve the internal audit plan and pipeline and ensure there's sufficient coverage and delivery. And secondly, we approve the internal audit charter. That recommendation. Yes, I'm sorry.
Can I just say that I agree with Councillor Andrews that should be after we've considered whether there should be some prioritisation in the plan, but other than that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll note that in the minutes. Thank you. Thank you. So moving on then to item 9. So this is the internal auditor's draft annual plan. So this is looking forward, and then the next item we look back. So item 9. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. So this is our audit plan as external auditors for the year 22-23, recognising that external audit is a retrospective exercise. So just to be very clear to committee members, as your external auditors, our responsibilities are twofold. It's to give an opinion on your financial statements and to issue a value for money conclusion. So that differs from what would happen in the private sector. In the private sector, the auditors of a private sector company would purely sign off their accounts to say they are true and fair. In the public sector, that role of the external auditor is expanded and includes a second responsibility in relation to value for money. And this plan essentially sets out in a bit of detail our approach to discharging our responsibilities. You will see, if I start with the opinion role first, you'll see that item 11 on the agenda today are the draft accounts for 22-23, and auditing those accounts will take up the majority of our resources that we need to discharge our plan responsibilities. We've undertaken planning and risk assessment, and that's informed this plan, but the most effective way to issue an opinion on those statements is to wait for the numbers and wait for the draft accounts, and then undertake substantive testing on those accounts. We work to a national timeline, and some of you may be aware that that timeline is very challenging and has been brought forward for 22-23. Nationally, there is a massive backlog in signing draft financial statements, but you are one of the few councils that I'm aware of that have met the earlier deadline for producing the draft accounts at the end of May. I've got 9 audits in local government, and I've received 2 so far, including Herefordshire. So you have produced the draft accounts, and on that basis we are able to make an early start, and you'll see within this plan that we are proposing to start our detailed substantive testing, our post-statements visit in a couple of weeks' time. It will be tight, but we are aspiring to achieve the sign-off date for issuing the opinion for 22-23 set nationally of the end of September, and that is set out in the plan. Now, when we get the accounts, we obviously have a responsibility to focus on the risks and the areas that present the greatest risk of misstatement. My reflection is that local government accounts have got larger and larger over recent years. Councils have become more complex, things like alternative service delivery models, wholly owned subsidiaries. You have Hoople, therefore you as a council need to produce group accounts, so that in itself makes your accounts more involved. I know that your accounts are shorter than previous years, which we very much welcome. Clearly you have to ensure that the detail within those accounts comply with accounting standards and reporting standards, but those accounts that you have on item 11, we will audit and we will check every single disclosure on every page within those draft accounts. We will check them back to something. We will actually check the draft accounts that they reconcile with your general ledger via the trial balance to make sure that everything's included, but we focus on the areas of greatest risk. You'll see on page 68 of your papers in the second column that we set a materiality. We set a separate materiality for the council, the single entity, and we set a separate materiality for the group. Based on our indicative views at the planning stage, the materiality for the council will be 9 million, and for the group it will be 9.1 million. So hopefully, when I do come to sign off the accounts at the end of September, I'm not signing them off to say they are correct to the penny. I'm saying that they are correct within that threshold and that target. And any disclosure within those accounts, within your primary statements, that are above that £9 million or the £9.1 million will be subject to additional audit procedures and further work. Within the plan, we also set out those areas of the accounts that are, in our view, subject to greatest risk, and those are set out on pages 69 to 72. And there's 4 significant risks that we identify, and these are default risks that I would expect to see at every council, or most councils that I audit. The first one is in relation to management override of control. So a lot of the work that we will do, starting in a few weeks' time, will focus on those elements of the accounts that are subject to greatest estimation and judgment. We also spend an awful lot of time reviewing journals. So journals are a really effective way of moving monies between account codes and cost centres, or dare I say financial years, should anybody wish to do so. So we use a clever bit of IT to take the total population of journals, analyse it, risk assess it, and then we pick out those journals that look like that they present the greatest risk, and we will undertake detailed testing of those journals to make sure that they are appropriate.
I think perhaps for the non-accountants, the word journal sounds like the Wall Street Journal or something like that. Could you give us just a one-to-one or whatever on that?
Yeah, a journal, sorry, Chair, layman's terms is important, isn't it? So a journal is a financial transaction within your general ledger, which records all your transactions and your balances, that moves money, that can move monies between different cost centres and cost codes and financial years. So it's a way of, once something's gone into the ledger, changing it and moving it around to somewhere else.
And you want to make sure that all those changes are justified.
And appropriate.
Because it's an easy way of manipulating the accounts.
But they're a key part of the accounting process. There are lots of journals that need to be made in any council, and it's absolutely appropriate that journals are used. Clearly, we need to make sure that we're comfortable with them. So we have management override controls in the accounts, and I don't want to steal Rachel's thunder, but in the accounts at item 11, in your balance sheet, you have a very big asset at the top of your balance sheet, which is your land and buildings. You use a valuer to help you value those land and buildings. They're subject to estimation and judgment. Only a small change in those estimation judgments can make some pretty fundamental changes to the value. We're really interested in that, and we spend an awful lot of our time looking at it, and we use our own auditor's expert, our own valuer, to make sure we're comfortable with what the council's done and how it's held its valuer to account, to make sure you're satisfied that's correct. In Herefordshire, you also have investment properties. Not every council has material investment properties, but you do. Some have huge amounts of investment properties. Investment properties, by their very nature, they're not there directly to provide service. They're there to generate income and or capital appreciation. They are, dare I say, even more susceptible to large swings in valuation, particularly given the current economic climate. So we're really interested in those as well, and similarly, lots of work goes into that area. The final area of significant risk is at the bottom of your balance sheet. And just as you have a very large asset in the land and buildings and investment properties at the top, you have a large liability at the bottom of your balance sheet, which is your pension fund net liability. And when I say large net liability, I am conscious that it's gone down considerably, and no doubt that will be discussed at item 11. It was 270 plus million, I think it's 26 million or something now. So but actually behind that 26 million is a very large asset and an even larger liability that we check. And we do a lot of work with the actuary to do that. So that is the focus of the opinion audit. And as I said, the aspiration is that come the end of September, we've completed our work and we're coming along to this committee presenting our findings. Just very briefly, back to the value for money role. Value for money, we have to make a judgment as to whether in our view you do or do not have arrangements in place for ensuring value for money. Value for money means lots of things to lots of people, but for us, it's based on the NAO code, the National Office Code. We're interested in financial sustainability, absolutely critical for all councils given austerity, ever increasing demands on your services, unit costs going up, etc. So can you set a budget that's based on reasonable assumptions, reflects the services being provided, do you monitor it, report on it, identify variances to deliver against budget, do you plan into the medium term, how is that done to ensure that you remain viable? We'll make commentary on that. And when I come on to the second item that I have on this agenda, which is item 12, we will talk about the VFM work that we've done for last year and the findings. So we look at financial sustainability, we look at governance, our decisions made based on complete and accurate information in the best interest of stakeholders. This committee has a really important role to play in terms of governance. You are those charged with governance, so that's a really important area for you. And then there's the third area, which is the 3 E's: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And that's how you deliver the services. You deliver them in an efficient way, in an effective way. And as I said, item 12 on the agenda will cover that. The only other thing I wanted to say, Chair, was probably the important area of fees. So page 82 sets out our indicative fees for 22-23 of 164,000. And you will see there is a little apologies for the font size. I just wanted to really get minuted more than anything, but it's on this page. The fee for the previous year included some uplifts, and in order to get those approved, we have to go to public sector audit appointments, who appoint us as your auditors. We submitted those additional fees and they accepted them all, except for one, because they didn't accept, totaling £1,500. So your fee is now £1,500 lower for 21-22 than it was when I came to the last meeting of this committee. So it won't be quite as much for 21-22. That is the plan, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Pete, thanks very much. I think I'd like to start just by thanking the auditors, the accountants within the council for getting the accounts out ahead of so many other councils. So that's a fantastic result. Thank you very much. Pete, I guess you're meeting the timetable to spend so much on the quality of the papers that you're being provided with. Hope you have a good working relationship. You'll get those papers, and we will be the first to get them signed off at the end of September. But there are two elements, aren't there? It refers to sign off the 30th of September, but the target completion date of later on. Completion date. The sign off and completion date both the same, aren't they? I'm trying to think. In our work programme, I think we sign off the account later on in the year. Is that right?
So
we get to everything.
The aspiration is that that we bring our findings from our work back to the September committee.
Yeah.
And following that committee and the formal sign off the accounts, then we issue our opinion on the financial statements. The value for money works to a later deadline, 3 months after the signing of the accounts.
Yeah.
And we are aiming for the end of December, which will be an improvement on the timing from the previous year.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the great thing about getting the accounts dealt with is that then everybody can concentrate on the current year instead of looking back, which some of the other councils seem to be having to do at the moment. So thank you, and thank you for committing to that date. The current problems you've got with employing people in your particular sector and everything, so it's well known in the press anyway. Any questions from anybody? You've highlighted the three main risks. We're pleased you're looking at pensions and property. In the summary on page 66, it does say at the last point, we've identified an increasing incentive and opportunity for organisations in the public sector to manipulate their financial statements due to increased financial pressures. That's something which you as a firm are aware of. Is it government saying you need to watch out for this? In many ways, with all the publicity of councils having done things terribly wrong in the past, you think that's going to be a bit of a problem for audits around the country, I guess, is that?
I think inherently the risk of deliberate financial misrepresentation. So fraud, from an auditor's perspective, under the auditing standards under ISO 240, fraud is two things. It's misappropriation of assets. So our audit is not aimed at identifying fraud. So misappropriation of assets is not something that our audit focuses on. If we come across it, clearly we're very interested and we report accordingly. Misappropriation of assets will always exist in all sectors, and it's well known, and there are lots of controls that councils have in place to prevent that. What we're talking about here is misreporting, financial misreporting. So the council produce the accounts and sign off those accounts. Deliberate financial misreporting is a fraud, equally as it is misappropriation of assets. And there are increasing, I believe, incentives to misreport. I dare say, possibly slightly more in the NHS, where they are under very pressurised financial targets. But however, also within local government, if a council is continuing to overspend its budget year on year, that puts a lot of pressure on the number of key individuals responsible for those accounts. And the incentive to misreport and hide that and to defer those costs to later years to give them time to recover is increasing, because the pressure on the finances within all local government bodies is much greater than it was even 5 years ago. I talked about it in my introduction. The austerity, the continued austerity, ever increasing expectations from the public, given the cost of living crisis, they're turning to councils more to support them in times of need. Unit costs are going up, hugely. You think about just the utilities, pay costs, pressures, etc. The ability of councils to balance the budget into the medium term is becoming increasingly challenging, and that is then resulting in more and more councils facing financial difficulties. And it's human nature to want to give individuals a bit more time to recover, and that can be done through the financial reporting.
Thank you.
Not that I'm suggesting for one moment there's any implication of that in Herefordshire, just to put on record.
Yeah.
And we haven't found anything in the past to suggest that is the case here.
Well, I suppose I'm more from a commercial background, looking at manipulation of profits to increase bonuses and that kind of thing. We don't have that. Your fee, am I right in saying it's going down compared to last year? Might be a bit naive.
So last year there were a number of additional pieces of work that we needed to do, partly driven by issues identified, but also partly driven by national issues that affected all councils. So the infrastructure issue that arose last year was a national issue that required further work across all our councils and incurred a further charge. So this is the indicative fee that you have here, and it is lower because we are optimistic that we're not going to have to do as much to discharge our role in 22-23 as we did in 21-22.
And I'm told you're outsourcing some of the work, is that right?
So
within Grant Thornton.
So we do have a number of our team that are sourced from abroad, predominantly from the Philippines and India. They probably represent about 15-20% of our workforce, what we do is ensure that there is proper quality control around that, to ensure that their work continues to meet the same standard that we expect of our workforce based here in the UK.
And is that kind of financially driven, would you say,
I think it's less financially driven than actually capacity, and I think you alluded to it in your observations about the delivery against the timelines. We are desperate to try to recruit the people with the right skills required to undertake the role of an auditor. We have a massive graduate and school leaver intake, but despite that, we have vacancies, and we just cannot recruit and attract the people with the right skill set to do the role. So we are always looking to do that, but by utilising people from abroad gives us that extra capacity to discharge our role.
When you talk about outsourcing abroad, are you subject to the same things that when we're audited at work, we would have to say that we've checked that everybody that's working for us has got the same rights as anybody in the UK. So people would want to know that products that we're sourcing are being sourced ethically, and can I just sort of in that broad spectrum know that every work that you outsource is then subject to that same sort of audit, that people are being paid properly and all things like that?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and one that I've not had before actually. I probably should have said these are Grant Thornton employees, so they work for Grant Thornton Philippines, Grant Thornton India. So they're, as you can imagine, the umbrella network, Grant Thornton International, there are minimum standards that are applied to any recruitment. So they are not some other company. They are Grant Thornton employees, just based in a different country.
Yes.
Is the difficulty of recruiting staff for us and for you a risk factor that you look at in your assessments? Because some projects, for example, might fail because we simply can't get the people to do them.
Well, as I said, there is a limited pool of people with the right skill set, and it's interesting how many people go from, like terminology, poacher, term gamekeeper, or the other way around, but people will move from the audit to the producing the financial statements. I mean, you used the word, yeah, we used the word, the audit commission, don't we? So it happens. So we've recruited people from local government bodies who worked in the finance team. We've had lots of our people who have gone from Grant Thornton to work for local government bodies as well. So actually trying to attract those people, there's a lot of competition for a finite number of people with the right skills. So it is a real risk for councils and for us, because there are lots of councils out there that have vacancies within their finance teams. And the finance teams are under more pressure than they've ever been under before, because there's lots more aspects to their role of finance officers than there was even 10, 15 years ago. So you have at the moment, you have the audit process is much more consuming for us because of the increased regularity and expectations. So our audit takes far longer because it goes into far more detail. We're crawling over your numbers like never before. If I went back 5 years, even 5 years, it was probably only about 60% of the effort we put in. But that in turn means that we're asking more questions of officers, finance officers, so they're spending longer dealing with the audit process, whilst also trying to manage the day job in terms of internal financial reporting, budget setting, etc. So there is a real challenge here about the size of the audit process and the complexity, and how as a sector the audit backlog can be caught up, because there are lots of councils out there that have 21, 22 accounts not signed off, some have 2021, some will go back even more. And then what assurance does that give the public funds if multiple years sets of local government accounts haven't been signed off?
Thanks for that. I just wanted to take it a little bit wider than that. When you look at the efficiency and economy of the services that we're supposed to deliver as a council, are you treating as a risk factor the fact that you might not be able to do it as economically as you thought because you're going to have to pay double to hire the people to get the job done, or whatever it may be? There's a risk in that labour and skills shortage in the wider workforce, not just in the finance area.
So as the external auditor, clearly the accounts bit of my role, the opinion of the accounts, I'm interested in the numbers. Does it record what you've spent and what income you've got in, and how much you're worth as a council and your assets and liabilities at a point in time? I'm interested in the numbers only, not interested in how effectively you've used that money and how and what it's been used for. The opinion is purely about the financials and the accuracy of them. The value for money side of our role, on particularly the 3 E's, economy, efficiency and effectiveness, we are interested in how you're providing services, how you're delivering them. And when we come on to item 12, we'll be talking about some of the findings and some of the particular challenges that you and other councils have, which clearly the biggest one is children's, and the challenge around that, and the costs associated with discharging your role as a council in that particular area is putting ever increasing pressure on all aspects of the council's operations.
So you are treating it as a risk factor?
For VFM, we are, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. You mentioned that some councils are obviously very late in their signing off of their financial accounts. How can they produce accurate budgets if they don't have, if they're so late?
Well, budgets are internal financial reporting and the accounts are external financial reporting. So they're slightly different and they're done on different bases. Obviously they reconcile, they should reconcile, but obviously the budget setting process, I wouldn't say it's mutually exclusive from the financial reporting, because clearly financial reporting and the assumptions within it in terms of balances and reserves, etc., are pretty fundamental, and how much you spend in a year will inform your budget process for the following year. But they can still set budgets because they need to set a council tax base and go to full council every February and do that for the year ahead. So that can continue infinitely, even if the accounts are still open. It's not ideal because they will make a number of assumptions within that budget that haven't been signed off by the auditors to confirm the accuracy of those assumptions.
Good, thank you very much. Any further questions? No. So I think, so the recommendations now on number 9 are, first of all, to approve the audit plan, which we do. We note the Appendix B in audit risk assessment, and we don't have any recommendations to maximise or change the value of combining the two services. So is that a agreed recommendation? All in favour? Thank you. Item 10, now this will take a short break. So the draft annual governance statement. Rachel, is this you?
Thank you, Chair. So the draft annual governance statement forms part of the statutory account, which is agenda item number 11. It's a primarily retrospective document. It provides a statement, a review of the governance arrangements that were in place for the year ended the 31st of March 2023. The statement itself outlines an overview of the governance framework and the internal and external sources of assurance that have informed that review. It's a review that's done in reference to the 7 core principles of the CIPFA Good Governance Framework, and through the statement we outline the arrangements that we have in place against each of those principles and some of the areas where we believe that arrangements could be strengthened further. The areas where arrangements could be strengthened further form part of an action plan, and an update on that action plan's delivery will be brought to this committee later in the autumn.
Any questions from the audience? So I'll just make the observations in the report, paragraphs 11, 12 and 13 are no longer relevant. It's been decided to retain the limit of £50,000 for the time being, and if the officers or this committee decide that the limit should be changed, then we can make that recommendation when we wish to in the future. So any other comments or observations about the statement? I think what I find quite interesting is that in each section it does actually point out areas in which improvement can be made, so we can look back in a year's time. I mean, presumably there is a process, Rachel, for reviewing what improvements have been made year on year.
We'll bring an interim report, I think, at a 6-month point through the year to update this committee on delivery of the actions that we've identified to strengthen those areas.
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments?
Note the comments, Chairman, and see what happens in a year's time.
That's funny, yes.
I note the comment about the capacity and capability of members.
Yes, we'll get a bit of training for that.
Yes, quite.
Okay, so the recommendation here is we determine whether the draft annual government statement reflects the risk environment the council is operating in and the areas where controls can be strengthened. We're satisfied with the report deals with that. So all those in favour of that, thank you very much. Okay, well, we have a scheduled break for 10 minutes. I think we're running ahead of time, which is quite a surprise. So well done everybody so far.
Congratulations, Chair.
So we'll be back. I've got a script here. I'm now calling a short adjournment with the meeting.
Accounts for the financial year ended 31st of March 2023. Draft accounts have been prepared to a prescribed statutory format in compliance with the CIPFA Code of Practice and International Financial Reporting Standards. As our external auditors commented in their earlier agenda item, we're one of 30 local authorities who have published their statutory accounts by the statutory deadline of the 31st of May. And the internal controls that we have and a strong finance team has enabled us to report our outturn position for the year in a timely manner and prepare and publish those financial statements, which we now present for public inspection and for external audit. The accounts include a narrative report, the primary statement, the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement, and the movement in reserves, and they're supported by some notes and accounting policies. We've streamlined the set of accounts for this year whilst maintaining compliance with the required code and accounting practices, and that's to reduce the volume, the number, the pages in the account seem to grow every year, so we've simplified what's remaining compliant, and they of course will be subject to external audit. There are a number of significant figures in the accounts which our external auditors have highlighted will attract additional audit procedures. These are largely the valuation of the council's land and buildings and investment properties, and evaluation of the pension fund liability. We engage a number of experts to assist in the preparation in informing the figures that we've used in the accounts. We engage an external firm of valuers, and we assess their competence and their qualifications, their RICs, registered valuers, and they provide our valuations in accordance with our rolling programme of assets. And similarly for the pension fund, we rely on the expert report of a firm of external actuaries. And these, the results that those independent experts present to us are subject to our own internal challenge, as well as extensive audit testing by our external auditors. The accounts present the council's position and performance for the year. The outturn position, as reported to Cabinet yesterday, was a small overspend of 5.6 million, and the figure presented in the comprehensive income and expenditure statement is slightly different to this as a result of some technical accounting adjustments, and we've provided some additional information on how those two figures reconcile, and that will be published and circulated after this meeting. I'd take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Just to reiterate, thank you for getting these accounts out so quickly. It's fantastic effort. Thank you. Any questions from anybody on these figures? All
Yes, just one question on the movement in the pensions liability. And pensions is from 272.6 million to 223.7 million. It seems largely to relate to this discount at 2% for in the discount applied. 0.5%, according to your table, gives a 43.1 million decrease in the, so with 170 million decrease because of this discount, whatever that is, and the rest is their reduction in the rate of inflation. Makes up the other 70,000. It seems odd when you're talking about making the same payments to pensioners that you've got a reduction. But can you tell us what the discount relates to, how it creates this decrease in the liability?
Joe, I'll pick that up if that's okay. In terms of the assumptions used to drive the pension calculation, I think what we're talking about. So there are two elements of the pension fund. One is the assets that the pension fund holds, the investments, and that's about £3.6 billion for the pension fund as a whole, and the fund is jointly between Herefordshire and Worcestershire. The other side of the calculation is looking at how much it will cost to pay people their pensions, and that's where the actuary does a series of calculations and driven by a number of assumptions to look at what that's going to be. So a person retiring today, let's say age 65, they'll make an assumption about their life expectancy. Let's say they will get to 90 on there, and the fund has to pay their pension for that time. And it's a defined benefit scheme, so we know on day one what their pension is because that's calculated, but that is how much that will increase over time and how long they will live and how much investment return the fund will get. So those are calculations and assumptions that are driven by the actuary, not ourselves.
Yes.
on there, and we've just come to the end of the triennial valuation where the actuary goes through and makes all those adjustments. So the actuary, as you've picked up, has made different assumptions agreed by the pension committee about life expectancy, returns, and the discount rate, and that's part of the difference between expecting earnings growth and investment income and inflation, which is quite a complicated calculation. So I haven't got a precise answer, but apart from it, rely upon the professional judgment of the actuary to make those assumptions. And as part of the audit process, the role of Grant Thornton is to then decide whether that's an appropriate thing and rely upon your own experts to check the assumption. Because you're right, that is a large, the impact of that change is quite significant on our liability.
This is the actuary's estimate of the increase in our assets to pay the pensions. I mean, we're still continuing to pay each year the same amount of pensions, more or less, to ex-employees. It seems odd that the value of the investments can go up that much in a single year that we have this reduction. But as you say, it's up to the actuaries to work that out.
Yeah, thank you. What really said is the really biggest figure in the accounts, obviously some obviously auditors will be looking at. Frank.
Obviously, for somebody like myself, who's used to dealing in thousands rather than millions, 5.6 million is there as am I right? I think that's like an overspend. Generally, as we get used to this, what would you say the council is trying to do? Is it just to what comes in goes out? Because I know we're not here to make money. I don't believe we're here to make money, but we are here to balance the accounts. And is that our target aim? Is that really we would end up with a sort of like a target will be zero at the end of each financial year? Is that and what happens when there is a continued overspend? Are we just digging into reserves?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the council sets its budget in February, and it's a balanced budget. So the resources that we have available in the expenditure balance. Through our in-year monitoring, then we monitor performance against that approved budget on a monthly basis with a forecast, and we report that quarterly to Cabinet. So the council's plan is always to live within that approved budget. In the last financial year, with the overspend, we were able to fund that from the Financial Resilience Reserve, and part of that, part of our medium-term planning over a 4 or 5 year period is to consider the reserve balances available to us and how we might ensure the council's sustainability in the future.
Yeah.
I think certainly when you start a new council, as I did 4 years ago, it's really quite precise. Some of the things the accounts are having to set a balanced budget. You know, why don't we set one which makes a profit, and then that can give some help. But at the end of the day, the results are also balanced. But you do take money into reserve. If we make a little bit of a surplus in a year, it goes into reserve, which with the accounting treatment shows we have a balanced outturn. But it does go up and down with reserves. Councillor Hamlin.
My question is about the reserves on page 14 of the narrative report. 2 points to the question. Firstly, is that the total of the reserves has risen considerably, and secondly, the unusable sector of that is now a huge proportion of the total, and I'm just wondering whether that's an efficient situation.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, you're absolutely right. I mean, the figures are huge, aren't they? And I think the broad answer, well, it's the pensions. But I'll leave it to Rachel to give a bit more needs on that.
So the reserves are separated into our usable and our unusable reserves. The unusable reserves, as you rightly note, have increased considerably, and that's largely due to the pension reserve, which is the corresponding entry for the pension liability that's sat in the balance sheet. We review and monitor reserves throughout the year, and we bring an update to Cabinet on our planned use of reserves, and that's also included as part of the budget setting process that's approved by the Council.
Okay, thank you.
And Peter, every year we'll be looking at reserves and all that kind of, you'll see that feature quite heavily, I think. Okay, any more questions? Mark?
Thank you. I'm looking at the infrastructure assets and the report, and there's a section there about the useful life of the assets. I don't quite understand how this is going to be interpreted into the accounts, because, you know, carriageways 20 years life and traffic management and everything starts at a different time. But this has been implemented in 22-23. This assessment was done, is that right?
That's right.
So how's this been used?
So our infrastructure assets are as you rightly say, the roads, the highways, street furniture, and we record those in our balance sheet, and under accounting practices we spread the cost of those assets over their useful economic life via depreciation. Now, in the last couple of years, there has been a sector issue around the accounting for those assets, and there was a detailed review undertaken by our external auditors last year in response to a national review. As part of the work that's come out of that, we have undertaken an additional review this year internally to consider whether the useful life that we are spreading the cost of those assets over is appropriate. And we've considered those in consultation with our highways colleagues and with our external auditors, and by reference to the SIPFA code and the recommended useful lives across each of those balances. Now, this year, Grant Thornton, as part of their audit procedures, will review the way that we have accounted for those, and in particular the difference in our accounting treatment this year, which is essentially an estimate. And in the external auditor's plan, they referenced earlier that they pay particular attention to those areas of estimate and judgment, and we'll be required to provide evidence around the assumptions that we've used and the information that informs those useful economic lives.
Okay, thank you. Does that mean that, just on the Grant Thornton side, does that mean, is this one of the elements that is going to increase the amount of time to do your auditing, because you're now having to look at infrastructure assets at that level of detail?
So it is factored into the indicative fee that's within our plan. We see that the peak in work was last year, but clearly, given it's year one of the new implementation of the new basis for depreciation of these assets, then we will be looking at it in detail, and subject to what we find, if that requires considerably more work, it may result in further work being required, but I'm hoping it's not going to be too burdensome. But it's important because they're big numbers.
I see. Thank you. So this year will be the first piloting of the cost of auditing that.
Well, I suppose the big input from us was last year, because, and for that matter from officers as well, because there was some retrospective fixing of the accounts that was required last year. This year going forward is pretty important, because unless the council get it right this year, then the cumulative effect further down the line can be significant and material to the financial position. So we will be focusing on it, as Rachel said, we will be focusing it when we come in next month.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you both.
More questions? No? Okay. So the recommendation is that we note the unaudited set of accounts, and then the final version will come to us at the end of September. Sign off. Each, won't they? Good. Okay, so we go backwards a little bit. So item 12 is the external auditor's annual report for 2021-22.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, absolutely, we're going backwards now. So previously, item 9, I talked about the plan for 22-23. We're now going back to 21-22. So our auditor's annual report, which starts on page 269 of your pack. Sets out the findings from our value for money work during 21-22. So I'm conscious it's a period sometime in the past, and the judgments that we make in this report are based on the arrangements that the council had in place in our view. At that time, we do recognise that things will have happened and moved on in the intervening period, and that I know action has been underway across a number of areas we comment on, and for that matter, other areas in the intervening period. And obviously what we will be looking to do is reflect those changes and hopefully improvements when we come to report in 22-23 VFM work, hopefully by the end of the year. So it is a long report, it is a detailed report. We're required to go into this level of detail by the NAO. I am actually joined, and I'm just looking up at the screen at the moment, by Jeanette. I can see she just turned on her camera. So Jeanette, I will hand over to Jeanette in a minute to go through a bit of the detail on the report, but before I do, I just wanted to make a few observations. And Jeanette is the author and a VFM specialist within the Grant Thornton team. The headline position is set out on 271 of your papers, and I did, when I introduced the plan, talk about the three areas, and you'll see the colour coordination there about where you are. I think you can take most assurance from the financial sustainability. That's not to detract from the real big challenge that all councils have in terms of balancing the budget and remaining sustainable. That's a green. You'll see that the governance is an amber, and that's consistent with the prior year. There are a number of issues in there, but they're not significant in nature. The big area you will see, which remains red as it did in the previous year, is around the three E's, and three particular areas that we've raised again, as we did in the previous year. And I will let Jeanette talk to those, and they're all important, but for me, my reflection before I hand over to Jeanette is that the main one is the children's, which is the real big challenge, as you all no doubt know, facing the council. Before I do hand over to Jeanette to take you through a bit of the detail, the only other thing I wanted to do, I'll give members a bit of time, is to just go down to page 304, which is, sorry, apologies, it's right at the back of the report, which is probably not the most helpful place. But when we undertake value for money work, and we find issues, we can that can result in recommendations. And there are three levels of recommendations that we make as part of our VFM work. The most serious recommendation is what we call a statutory recommendation. And that really is the nuclear option and is reserved for the most serious issues within councils. And they were few and far between, but they are becoming a lot more frequent. And there are some real high-profile councils out there, your Sloughs, your Northamptons, all those sort of places where there's been Croydons, where there's been statutory recs issued because of the serious shortcomings and weaknesses in arrangements in those councils. And they're all over the press. And you do not want to be in that position when you're getting a statutory rec. And obviously in this report, we are not suggesting there's any statutory recs at all here. So you can take comfort from that. You're not in that small but increasing number of councils in that position. You then have key recommendations. We make key recommendations when in a particular area, one of those three areas, we believe the council do not have appropriate arrangements in place. And we have made three key recommendations here. So we've got three key recommendations. They're all in the final category, the three E's, and they are similar to the ones raised in previous years. And I know things have happened since the reporting period, but those are the key recommendations and those that need most attention to avoid those appearing in future reports. And then we have the lowest level recommendation, which are called improvement recommendations. And every council will have lots of these, because these are in areas where we're saying that arrangements are fine, but we believe that there's scope, based on what we see elsewhere, best practice, to refine those arrangements and improve on those. So you have no statutory recs, take assurance. You have three key recs, which are important, and you have a number of improvement recs, which are supporting you, should you wish to do so, to improve those arrangements in those areas. But it's quite legitimate for the council to go, well, actually, I agree, but it's going to cost us lots of time and effort, and we prefer to spend that time and money somewhere else, and that's completely appropriate. So that's the high-level context. With your permission, Chair, I'll just hand over to Jeanette to just go through a bit of the detail, particularly on the key recs, if I can.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Thank you, Chair. I assume everybody can hear me okay? Yeah, thank you. I just, actually also, before I talk about the key recommendations and improvement recommendations, I just wanted to pick up, and sorry, I wasn't sure if we mentioned the aspect of financial sustainability or level of reserves. I mean, that is something that we do look at as part of our value for money arrangements. And as a result of that, you could see from the executive summary in the report, which is page 271, that you know, we're saying the improvements that are improved, and that on the basis of reserves and the other arrangements that we look at, that there were proper arrangements in place for financial sustainability, and that includes your level of reserves. But just wanted to pick up on that. So if we think about the key recommendations, and the best place to look at is on 272, and they follow on from there as well. Sorry, I'll pick up the page when we get to that point. But Pete very much picked up, and I think of the three, you know, key recommendations. I think, and as you as a authority are completely on the page, that the need to address the requirement for the children's services is your number one priority, and I know you're working with the Children's Commissioner for that, and there will be plans and action plans in place to address that. I will come back if there's questions on that, but I don't think, I mean, I assume you're quite familiar with those requirements, so I won't go to detail on that. The other aspect is to have effective contract management arrangements in place for the public realm. And there was an element of timing issue with this, of when we looked at 2021 work and 21-22, that there wasn't sufficient time to address that in year, and it comes back to the point that we're making. So we are looking at the arrangements are in place and what was the situation in the year of audit, which is 21-22. We've reflected in the report some of the improvements you've made there. So, you know, that's looking positive when we come back to look at things for next year. Sorry, by next year, I do mean 22-23. Again, it's always difficult to get the right year when we're backward looking. I mean, the third area is around the contract management arrangements with Balfour Beatty Living Places Limited, where we identified this was a dormant company. And I think it's now clear what further steps need to be taken to ensure. I think that the council's of the view that they don't consider this to be a risk, and what the council therefore needs to do to ensure that is clearly documented and brought to members, so it's quite clear why they think this is no longer a risk, and that what they will do and how they mitigate and are proposing to manage that risk as they see it. So the key recommendations sit within, sorry, just scrolling through, actually sit within at the back of the report, because we're reiterating the recommendations from the previous year, so we're not required to issue them again. Just wanted to pick then up on the improvement recommendations. Again, what people are saying, we don't, you know, sort of these are the nice to have, that take you from adequate arrangements to, okay, let's see how we can improve and take things forward. We've said within financial sustainability we haven't identified any improvement recommendations, which is really positive. In respect of governance, we have identified 2 improvement recommendations, so those are on page 286 and 287. I mean, the first links to the key recommendations in respect of how can the, you know, council ensure the pace of change and bring about the desired improvements that are required. So we're suggesting there, so, you know, so to think about how, you know, processes could be improved and perhaps more rigorous processes implemented. And also to think about yourselves as Audit and Governance Committee, perhaps having a single record of all recommendations that have been brought to you by internal audit and external audit and maybe other regulators. That is on page 287. And again, for yourselves, the committee, consider bringing in appointing independent members to the audit committee. The idea being this, it's a recommendation. Sorry, it's difficult to hear me. I'll try and speak a bit louder. Should consider appointing. Okay, sorry. So is it really? Sorry, Chair. So am I understanding you're still having problems understanding me?
No, it's a little bit better now. I think when you're closer to the screen, it's probably better.
Right. Okay. I'll try my best not to move, and apologies.
When you get excited about accounting. So.
That's my problem. I get animated. I move around. I'll try my best not to move. That's the difference of so apologies for that. So I was just picking up on the independent members. SIPFA have suggested this within one of their standards. And I guess, as you know, you might have new members on the committee and things. The idea from this is to introduce and look for people to fill particular skills that you might feel that are missing from existing membership, and again, just to bring in that independent element. So I will now move on to the improvement recommendations within the 3E section.
Yes, I think as is kind of a break in the flow, perhaps we might deal with that recommendation now. I don't know whether any members of the committee have any particular views and thoughts on having independent people invited to join this group.
I was getting with this.
Could we have a bit more detail about what their duties might be, what sort of people we might be talking about?
Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Maureen.
Yes, I mean, I think it would be to an advantage to the committee if we had to have a couple of independent members. As you'd say, the difficulty is in recruiting them and getting suitable people. I don't know if Grant Thornton found any way with other councils have managed to do this.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, the desire to have independent members is there's increasing demand from all the committees, even before this guidance came out about suggesting it was good practice, not least to reflect potential gaps in skill sets within all the committees. So if there isn't many financially literate members of the committee, then it would be sensible to bring somebody in, somebody possibly with risk, etc., in to support the challenge and discussion within the audit committee. So I have seen an increasing number of committees with one or more independent members sitting on the committee. I do think it brings added value and further challenge. And the challenge is to make that assessment about where potentially you might want to bring in further skills. So what you're looking from an individual when you bring them in. And once you've done that, the hard bit happens, because then you've got to try to find somebody. And that's the really hard bit. So I've got lots of committees that have tried desperately to find people with the skills they're missing and have been unsuccessful. So it is a quite a complex and involved process. Some have been very successful. I've got one where they've got 2 independent members. But it is definitely something that if you can secure, does add value.
Yeah, my view is we should take a wider view of who might be valuable to the committee. Do we need another auditor or accountant, for example? We've got some very good ones in this room already. We might need people who perhaps are a contractor or a business operator or somebody, even the foreman of the work gang, even might be asking the right questions of these sort of things. So perhaps it'll be helpful if we're looking for additional people to widen the view of who might be useful.
Okay, so I think what we need is probably a paper, Andrew, which sets out the criteria, and some sort of time scale for going out and
Find somebody.
trying to find someone, advertising, recommendations, kind of person, and also perhaps a bit of analysis of what other councils around the area do, or ones of similar size to us, and how they've got that recruitment.
I'm very happy to do that, and I suppose part of that process, because you're a newly formed committee, is probably that we do a skills analysis with yourselves to work out where you've got skills and where there are gaps, and where we've got training. So we're happy to bring a paper back, and we'll go onto the work programme. We'll probably find a slot to bring it to the appropriate committee. Very happy to do.
I'd like to do it quite quickly if we could.
We may struggle for your July meeting, but let's aim for the September meeting.
Yeah. But I think if we were able to have some sort of draft that the committee members can sort of comment on in the meantime, about sort of terms of reference and kind of person, just that we don't have the next meeting and that considers the terms of reference and then it's dated a couple of months later.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interim, kind of, like say, thought paper of some sort, in the interim, which can circulate to and anybody who wants to go on the internet and have a look and see what other councils do and what kind of people they've got, might be helpful.
Excuse me.
Yes, yes.
I just noticed in the, maybe this is a different independent person, but in the previous minutes, item 77, there was a discussion about the previous meeting, is that right?
Yes, that's they deal with complaints and that kind of thing, so you go out to an outside body. This is specifically someone we would want for this particular.
Understood. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Standard.
Yes, Andy. So Jeanette, I've sort of disrupted your flow a little bit, but we've got a recommendation and outcome for that, for one of the three issues you've raised. No.
Absolutely fine. Would you like me to continue and pick up on this? As I was on the improvement recommendation in 294, where I'm suggesting that you should consider updating the indicators used to assess delivering and the progress on the ambitions and objectives within the county plan, just to ensure that if, as a reader, you pick up one in the county plan, you can see the links and the issues around the Children's Services Improvement Plan. I'm not suggesting that you aren't aware of the issues that are required to within the improvement plan, but I'm trying to make it easier for the reader that you know, from whichever document you pick up and what issue, you know, you shouldn't need to read two. You should be able to read one and quite clearly see what the issue is. So what I'm suggesting there, that's the final improvement recommendation that I make is about improving the governance arrangements around Hoople Limited, to consider the role of the shareholder, members and officers who sit on the board, to ensure that the potential and risk of conflicts of interest is effectively managed, and also to think about the role of scrutiny. I'm very much aware as well in the findings there, I comment again as a role of Audit and Governance Committee that I think sits within your terms of reference, but again, this function of duty was not discharged during 21-22. I say that brings me through the improvement recommendations. What the next page then brings you to the follow-up of previous recommendations, and that's where we start with the previously raised key recommendations and other recommendations raised, and we comment on the progress and whether further action is taken. So you start with the key recommendations and then follow through to the improvement recommendations that were raised previously. So those improvement recommendations that I've just talked you through are new ones that weren't raised last year. And I will stop at that point. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. So going backwards a little bit, page 297, the issue with the BBLP contract. The further action here is the council review its arrangements. The decision should be formally communicated and signed off by Cabinet. So I think we're happy to leave that to Cabinet at the moment to see what the Cabinet report comes back with. It seems that there are some legal issues over agency And I don't know, does anybody else have a more concern than me, or Aubrey?
Yes, I am concerned with this contract, particularly if it seems that we are receiving invoices and paying Balfour Beatty Living Places, which apparently is a dormant company, so can't possibly be trading with us. And I know Balfour Beatty Group have written back saying it's an agency company, but I don't see how it doesn't have to produce, it must have to produce accounts to send to Companies House if we are paying it checks, and it must have to report to the HMRC Inspector of Taxes. You know, I don't like to think that we're possibly part of some arrangement by Balfour Beatty Group to reduce their taxes. I think we need to establish this position very urgently. You know, it cannot be a dormant company if we are paying checks.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. We have taken legal advice on this ourselves, internally and externally. We're satisfied as to the arrangements. I think what you said was right. It cannot be a dormant company, and that is correct. So we're of the view that this doesn't bear any risk to the council. We have additional documentation, parent company guarantees, which show that there is no risk, that if there is a default, that there is a group company that we can also enforce any contractual provisions against. So we are satisfied as to that position from a legal perspective.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sean. Aubrey, do you want the second bite of that?
Well, we may be satisfied from that point of view, but it still seems somewhere some illegality in this being classified as a dormant company. We know that, and we're trading with it.
Sean, do you want to, are you?
I would hesitant to say illegality. I think that is just the way that they have reported. So they have reported through group accounts. Like I said, we've taken advice in relation to their arrangements. The view is that their arrangements with HMRC and what they report to Companies House, if it's correct or incorrect, is a matter for the company. But we have documentation that says we have a binding contract with this company. We have a guarantee that says that if there's any risks of default, that we can then enforce it against the parent company. And I don't really want to comment on how Balfour Beatty reports its kind of income tax and its group through its group accounts. I know different companies do it in different ways, and I'm not probably the best person to kind of advise on that. But this has been seen. Our external advisor has said that he has seen this before. I think the point that you made right at the start, which is it cannot be a dormant company, is the right answer. It isn't a dormant company. Thank you, Chair.
I think I understand that the contract is up for renewal shortly. Will we be looking to sign the new contract with a new part or version or group of Balfour Beatty so that this problem is not highlighted again?
Sean?
I don't know. It could be an option. It's unnecessary, but it could be an option. I don't know exactly what the proposed arrangements with the proposed party are, but if they are exactly as they are at the moment, then we would be satisfied to that, because as far as we're concerned, the company isn't dormant, we have the guarantees, and we don't have the risk. Thank you.
And I think, Peter, we'll see what appears in the Cabinet report, and look out for that, see what the recommendation and what Cabinet decides to do. Thank you. So that's the dormant company recommendation. On the children's services, we all know the priority that has within the council to get it resolved. Are there particular control issues in that area? Jeanette, is that what your issue is with this, or?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question in respect of control issues within the children's services.
Well, it's a matter of what, you know, it's a key priority area for us as a council, and it's going to have potentially have financial implications as the auditors have. You're in a way you're flagging something which we know exists and is an issue. Are there further actions which you'd expect the council to be taking?
I don't think there's further actions you should be taking other than those that have. So in respect of this, we do rely on the evidence provided by the third party, in other words, the Children's Commissioner. So at the point of time when we reviewed this and looked at, we were very much, you know, looking at what the Children's Commissioner was saying, and from that forming our judgment. I mean, and it's fair to say, I think everybody would be very surprised if we hadn't formed this judgment on this. So for me, it is about sort of maybe, you know, how, you know, have you know, improve or increase the pace, but again, that's equally borne out by the Children's Commissioner, isn't it? So, and I understand the Children's Commissioner was coming back to review it again after a short period of time, but officers will know better than me if that actually has happened or not.
Yeah. Okay, now in the risks identified in the EEE section, the second part is lack of effective contract management arrangements. Now we've got the PMO in place, so this is relating to the year 21-22, so we're 12 months further along. Are we likely to see this issue raised by you again, or do you think the things the council is doing is covering off this?
I would expect it not to be in 22-23, and I think likewise, I think obviously probably concur with me here that you know, I think you have begun to make, you know, sort of improvements in 22-23. I mean, obviously we reserve the right to look at this again, but and to double check on that. But that is the indications we have. We just need to fully look and review what has been implemented in 22-23.
Okay, thank you very much.
Does looking at contract management include looking at contract issuing? Is that part of the package?
Sorry, did you say contracts issued?
Yeah, is contract management the same thing as it includes contract issues?
So in respect of the where we within the 3E section where we look at, I think, procurement and contract, you know, we look at procurement and contract management. So yes, contract management, I would say, was, you know, the management of the contracts once it had been awarded. But yes, likewise, we would look at and form a view on the procurement arrangements and tendering if again an issue was brought to our attention. And let's say we look at, I comment in the report on contract breaches. So absolutely, if there was something brought to our attention or became aware that the arrangements weren't effective, we would delve deeper in that. But at the moment, we're saying as far as we can see in the work that we've done, that the procurement element and aspect, that there are proper arrangements in place.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think I want to go back to page 286. So this is the improvement recommendations, and management comments. We will review arrangements for 2023-24 to ensure the completion of improvement recommendations from external and internal sources can be monitored. So we're relying upon management to take those sort of actions in connection with that. Are we as a committee satisfied with that. I must admit, I'm not totally, in my mind, I don't totally understand quite what the improvement recommendation is. Jeanette, are you able to explain any more?
Sorry, again.
This doesn't relate just to families, to children's, does it? This is across the whole council. Rachel,
Yeah.
because if you might understand what the issue is.
Sorry, is it the second bullet point about the single record that you require?
Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah.
Okay. So my understanding as an Audit and Governance Committee, you are tracking recommendations in respect that are raised for yourselves. I'm suggesting extending that to actually track the recommendations that are being brought to you through as part of your assurance role, so that you could see and keep a track of ensuring that these recommendations were addressed and in a timely manner.
Rachel.
Does that help?
And as our external auditors mentioned earlier, these are the nice to haves, and we already have some measures in place for you to be able to monitor the progress of implementation where improvement actions are identified. And so as part of this report, we will consider how we can bring those together. Those measures are in place currently, it's about bringing them together for ease of presentation for this committee to monitor.
Okay, everybody happy with that? And then the next page is the audit member will talk about that. I'm just going through the recommendations, so page 294, Children's Improvement Plan, talk about that. Interrupt me if you not followed to then 295. Hoopel, so we've dealt with that one. And then follow up with previous recommendations. We've got item 1 is children's again, item 2 contract management. Page 297 is dormant company, 298.
I think it's fair to say, Chair, that the majority of the recommendations, improvement recommendations raised, that you have management have addressed those.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody, any questions on those? No? Okay. So, do you want to make any final comments, Pete?
No, Chair, only to say that clearly we will look to provide a more timely report for 22-23 that will give committee a more up-to-date position on progress against those in other areas.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation is that we review the report which we've done, notice findings, recommendations we're making about independent members. A little bit nervous still about the BBLP contract, and we'll wait and see what happens when the Cabinet's reviewed that. So I think that is the recommendation.
Yeah, there is one minor recommendation that the council should develop more comprehensive and integrated workforce plans and support the recently developed workforce strategy. Is that being done?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah. So do we want to take that forward for the audit committee to have a look at it sometime in the next 3 to 6 months, perhaps? We could add that to the work programme, please. Okay, so the recommendations agreed, I think they are. Thank you. Yeah. Pete, when you do go, when you feel you need to. Thank you very much for coming over. Yeah. As part of the whistleblowing policy, this has been around a little bit in the audit committee. I think this is the third committee this has been to, Sean.
The third time, Chair, yes. So If I may introduce it, Chair, just briefly. So the recommendation before you today is to ask you to approve the revised whistleblowing policy and guidance. That's attached to Appendix A in the report. Changes to the policy have been made at the request of the committee in November 22, who asked us to simplify and update the policy. The policy was then considered again in March 23 by this committee, and the paragraphs in the report which coloured yellow are the further updates and responses of the officers to the comments made back in March. The policy wasn't adopted in March, as the committee felt that the union should have been given a further opportunity to respond to the policy. So we had consulted with them, but we reported that we hadn't had a response at that point. In March we were asked again, so we went back to the unions again. Unison have come back to say that they don't have any concerns in relation to the policy. Finally, just to let you know that internal audit have undertaken a review of the whistleblowing policy as it was and the processes that were used, and we will be reporting that back to this committee with our annual report on whistleblowing. We are still awaiting the final report from internal audit. My colleague Deborah Upton, who's on remote, she drafted the policy, so I don't want to steal her the plaudits for the work that she's done. So if you have any questions on the policy, both myself and Deborah can answer that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Frank?
So just to bring us up to speed as quickly as we can then, Sean, what has initiated the whistleblowing policy? And is it something ongoing, or is it just something that's needed to be done?
I wasn't back in November time, so I wasn't in that meeting. But my understanding from reading the minutes is that the policy is due periodic updates.
Right.
So it was updating the policy to include the proper references to the current methodology of discharging that process, updating links to the charities that exist to assist whistleblowers. So it was more of a kind of typographical changes. There were some other changes in relation to where a whistleblowing complaint could be made. So I don't think I'm overstepping the mark. I think the members thought it was a bit too complex, involving third parties, and the desire was to kind of have it brought back purely within the organisation as much as we can. And if you see from the policy, we have a number of contacts within the council that a whistleblowing complaint can be made to, in addition to the external bodies which a complaint can be made. So it was a bit of a mixture of the two, I understand. I don't know if Deborah's got anything to add to that, but if not, that's it.
And the whistleblowing covers people working for the council and other related bodies. Is that my understanding?
Yeah. Yes. So it's protecting employees, and employees includes workers, so third-party workers. So if we have locums, temps, that type of thing. Also, if we have, it protects the employees in the schools. If they don't have their own whistleblowing policy, they can use ours. But also, any third-party contractor who's agreed to abide by our policy can also refer it through to us as well. In practice, it doesn't matter where the whistleblowing complaint comes from. If anybody raises a complaint through this process, you can guarantee that we're going to look at it irrespective of who the author of it is. And that may involve us dealing with it under our policy or possibly redirecting it to the correct forum.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And then Holly. Oh, we're going to do St. Holly.
Thank you. I just wonder if we have any figures at all for the number of whistleblowers in this council who have remained in council employment. I'm reminded of a comment made by Councillor James, naming a company in which a whistleblower has subsequently done well. And as a former employee of the National Health Service, I can tell you that if you raise a whistleblowing complaint, your contract with the National Health Service is likely to come to a very abrupt end, even if you're a very senior member of staff. So I just wonder how it actually works in practice rather than just discussing it in theory.
John, can that be covered off in the SWOT report?
I think that would probably, we'll note that down and see if we do have that information. I suspect not, because a lot of the whistleblowers are anonymous, so we don't actually know who they are. So they could be ex-employees or current employees. So, and just to bring, and I think that reinforces the point that I'm saying, that it doesn't matter who the author is, we will look at it to see, because obviously we need to get under the issue that has been raised and try and see if there is an issue and try and rectify that. So we'll have a look at what we've got, but I don't think we'll have those figures, but we will see what we can.
Thank you. I would be surprised if you have.
Sure. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't clear on what part of the policy is of when the police or an external body like that should be brought in. When is that? How is that decision made?
Okay, that would be a judgment call again. So the monitoring officer has responsibility for this process and would make that judgment call. So it comes in, whistleblowing, if it comes in to us, then the monitoring officer has an overview of that and sight of the complaint or the issue. If there's anything which we think is a police matter, we would make a judgment call and consult with the monitoring officer, who then can refer that matter back to the police if necessary, or any other appropriate agency. The policy isn't rigid on how we look at it. If you looked at that, there's nothing in there that says you must do this, you must do that. But we'd make a judgment call on exactly, would it be appropriate for us to look at this ourselves, or would it be more appropriate to leave it to the police because different standards in relation to evidence, that type of thing. So it may be more appropriate as a if you're talking about a criminal offence which the police would prosecute rather than another body, because you could be talking about training standards, you could be talking about any number of them. Yes, that's it. So we would make a judgment call there on the based on our experience.
Just for the record, I'm an ex-police officer. It seems to me that deciding subjectively whether you should tell the police is not the right approach. If you, from your knowledge, see that it appears to be an allegation or a complaint of a crime, that should automatically go to the police. They can decide whether they're going to pursue it or not, or whether they're going to prosecute anybody, but it should go to the police, surely, not subjectively, but objectively.
Sorry, I think you put that more eloquently than I did. The judgment call is whether or not to give it to the police. What I'm talking about, if we find something which is, if it indicates it's a criminal offence, then we'll report it. As you say, that's for the police and the CPS to decide. But our judgment call is who is the appropriate body to look at the whistleblowing. Is it something that we should look at because it concerns an employment matter? If it's a CQC matter, then we could refer it to them. So that's kind of what I meant by that judgment call. Where should it sit? And if it's something which indicates a criminal offence, then we would pass that on.
Yeah, because I've dealt with these things myself, and very often they're both. There may be an allegation of crime, there's allegation of other problems within an organisation, and that will colour what can be proceeded with first. You can't interfere with a criminal investigation, for example, by doing your internal procedure investigation. So it will colour the whole way the policy is enacted.
It's exactly the same.
All right, you're on board with that. Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on that, is there a department then in the police that you've already approached saying, if we have an issue, who can we talk to?
There is a contact between the monitoring officer and a contact within the police. So she would be able to refer that directly to that named contact, and they would then be able to pass it on to the relevant person.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much for your questions. So I think that we accept and agree with policy without amendment, and look forward to first report on findings and result of it. Thank you very much. So the last item then is then the work programme. It's a little bit difficult for us to work out whether this is entirely appropriate because it's such early days for us. I must confess, I didn't find it altogether easy to follow. It's something which we've taken on from the previous committee. So I think perhaps between now and the next meeting, we might just have a look at it and see whether we think any changes need to be made to it. We can pick up one or two during the meeting. It'd be nice to think that we might manage in such a way that we have one less meeting in the year. I don't know, Rachel, do you have particular thoughts on it?
I just wanted to raise a point regarding the workforce strategy question that we suggested might be included in the work programme. A paper on the Security Management Board in January, and it's been considered there, so I imagine that might be part of their work programme.
So which committee was
Scrutiny Management Board, it was 17th of January 2023, a report and some recommendations presented to that.
Thank you. So does anybody else have any observations at the moment? So just think about if you think that a particular aspect of work we should be looking at. Let us know. It might be a few months before we really get from anybody who worked with the council before thinking things that might be appropriate to come to this committee.
Yeah, do we, if we come up with something, do we raise that privately with you first and see if you can?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, yeah. Mark?
Same.
Yeah. And then we might have a pre-meeting before the next meeting. We can toss around a few ideas then. Thank you. Okay, so recommendations subject to any further updates made by the committee. We agreed the work programme. I think that's agreed. Thank you. There's a note here of the future meetings. Dates of future meetings have been suggested for members' consideration, as are shown on the contents page in the agenda. The next one is 31st of July. We're thinking making it the 29th of September, I think, to enable the auditors to come along and sign everything on that day. Then 24th of October, looks like the last of the Tuesdays, yes, last Tuesdays of each month, with the exception of December and February and April. So if we get away with some meetings in the year, I think that would be quite good. Okay, so I will